There is a kind of pain that never screams. It doesn't echo through hallways or shatter windows. It doesn't bleed or bruise in visible ways, but it exists in the hollow silence after betrayal, in the stillness of a room once filled with laughter, in the fragile heartbeat of someone who dared to love, trust, or give without defense. You know that pain, the kind that settles deep into the soul and lives there quietly, uninvited. They hurt you, loudly, not always with fists or curses, but with ridicule, coldness, gossip, dismissal, deception. It echoed. It echoed in the way they twisted your truth into their entertainment. It echoed in the way they spoke your name as if it carried no weight. They paraded their cruelty like a badge of strength, while you carried your dignity like a burden. And what did you do? You stayed silent, not because you were weak, but because your strength was rooted in restraint. You endured in stillness. You suffered quietly. You didn't fight fire with fire. You let your tears be seen by none. You bore your cross in secret, and the world called your silence cowardice, but God called it courage. He saw you choosing peace over retaliation, choosing grace over vengeance. And though they heard only your silence, God heard every word you couldn't say. What the world didn't notice, heaven recorded. They hurt you loudly, perhaps to feel powerful, to distract from their own emptiness, or simply because cruelty came naturally to them. Their pride found satisfaction in your quiet sorrow. But the silence you carried wasn't empty. It was full of prayers. You didn't need to shout your story from the rooftops, because God has always been your witness. He watched you cry behind closed doors. He saw the way you held your breath during conversations just to keep the peace. He watched you serve, love, support, give, and be discarded as though you were nothing. He saw the way they disfigured your worth while pretending to be righteous. And though you never demanded justice, heaven is not unjust to forget. In a world obsessed with noise, you chose quiet, not because you had nothing to say, but because you trusted the one who speaks last. You believed that the God who parts seas and stills storms is more than able to vindicate the unheard. And you were right, because while they performed pain on stage, you endured reality backstage. While they mocked, manipulated, and misused, you kept walking in truth. But now, listen closely. The silence is over, the season is changing. That same God who watched you break in private is preparing to bless you in public. The same God who saw every insult, every betrayal, every wound is rising with justice in his wings. He is not slow to act, though it has felt like forever. No, he is precise. He is waiting for the moment when your enemies will be exposed by their own actions, not by your words. Because God's justice is not loud, it is holy, and when it comes, it silences every lie. When he restores you, it will humble every voice that mocked you. When he elevates you, it will expose those who tried to bury you. When he speaks, it will be undeniable. You won't need to explain anything. He will do it for you. Now, pause, reflect. Is it not comforting to know that you were never truly alone? That every tear had a witness? That every silent heartbreak was seen by the God of all creation? Is it not powerful to realize that your endurance was not in vain? That your integrity is being honored in ways you cannot yet see? You endured quietly because you trusted loudly in him. And now he will respond divinely, justly, faithfully. There's a kind of silence that is not empty but holy. A silence that holds the weight of wisdom, restraint, and reverence. It is the silence of the one who could have spoken in fury but chose not to. It is the silence of someone who knew that shouting into chaos only feeds the storm. That was your silence. It wasn't the silence of fear, but the silence of faith. You trusted that the one who sees everything would also speak when the time was right. When they spoke against you, you didn't match their volume. You didn't gather people to your side or defend yourself with clever words. You didn't blast your pain across every room that had ears. And in a world that mistakes silence for weakness, that decision cost you. You were labeled as passive, as fragile, even as foolish. But they didn't know that your silence was a prayer, a waiting, a weapon far more powerful than anything they could have expected. You walked through rooms where your name had already been bruised by whispers. You smiled in places where your soul was breaking. You stayed calm, not because you had no words, but because you had too many, and none of them were bitter enough to be spoken aloud. You swallowed pain, not to please them, but to honor the God who was watching you. Because you knew that the silence of the righteous echoes louder in heaven than the noise of the wicked ever could on earth. And what strength it took to keep still. How easy it would have been to shout back, to write your own narrative, to list all the wounds they inflicted. But you didn't. You let God be your narrator. You trusted Him to hold your reputation, to guard your soul, to speak on your behalf when all was said and done. That kind of strength doesn't come from pride. It comes from knowing that divine justice is never rushed, but it is always right. They thought they won because you didn't retaliate, but they misunderstood your silence. They thought your quiet was defeat, when in truth it was preparation. Because in the quiet, you were being refined. You were being shielded from becoming like them. You were being trained to let go of vengeance so that your hands would be free to receive peace. And now that silence has become your sanctuary. You've found God more clearly in the moments when no one else was listening. You've heard His voice in the places you were discarded. You've built resilience not by shouting louder, but by standing firmer. And though no one else may have clapped for your silence, heaven did. They shouted their hurt, you bore yours. But while their voices fade into the wind, your silence was written into eternity. Some people don't just cause pain, they perform it. Their cruelty isn't hidden in shadows, it's paraded in daylight. They want to be heard, to be seen as powerful, to remind the world that they hold the reins of someone else's heart. That's how they hurt you, not gently, not in passing, but loudly. They made it known. They turned your heartbreak into a performance. Their betrayal wasn't silent. It was shouted with actions meant to humiliate, to diminish, to control. And yet, while they were busy orchestrating your fall, you were quietly holding yourself together, piece by trembling piece, alone, unseen, but not unacknowledged. Because even when the crowd watched them destroy you, even when no one stopped to help, God was watching you, not them, you. And not because you were helpless, but because you were holy to Him in your brokenness. They shouted your weaknesses, and God whispered your worth. Every insult they hurled, He caught. Every moment you cried, He counted. Every time you were left out, stepped on, or dismissed, heaven marked it. Not one moment of your pain escaped His sight. They heard you publicly to elevate themselves, but they didn't realize that the very pain they inflicted would become the reason for your divine restoration. You didn't scream for pity. You didn't demand justice. You simply endured, quietly. And in doing so, you walked the same path of the sacred. The wounded who choose mercy over malice, who choose God over revenge, that kind of soul is rare, that kind of strength is eternal. and it never goes unnoticed in the eyes of the Almighty. The world clapped for their drama, but God wept with you in secret. He didn't need a stage to witness your suffering. He saw the unseen, the unheard, the misunderstood. He saw you holding shattered dreams in cupped hands, still hoping, still loving, still praying, and that moved heaven more than any loud apology or confession ever could. They sought attention through your ruin, but God is preparing redemption through your ashes. Because when man uses pain to gain applause, God uses pain to prepare miracles. And while they chase approval through destruction, you've gained favor through faithfulness. So keep holding the pieces, not because you must fix yourself, but because God is about to do something with them, something they never saw coming. They were loud in their cruelty, but He will be louder in your comeback. And when He restores you, there won't be a soul who can deny that your pain had purpose and your silence had power. There is a mysterious sacredness in suffering that no eye can witness and no voice can articulate. It is found in the moments when a person collapses inwardly, not from weakness, but from having carried too much for too long. That's what happened to you. You didn't crumble on a stage, you withered in a corner, not in bitterness, but in surrender, not before an audience, but before God alone. They didn't hear the depth of your groans when everyone else had gone to sleep. They couldn't see the way your hands trembled when you tried to smile through another wound. You held yourself together like a fragile temple, praying no one would notice how close you were to collapse. But someone did notice. He was there. God was there, not as a distant spectator, but as an ever-present Father. He didn't require your words to understand your sorrow. He didn't need your explanations to feel your ache. He was listening when you said nothing. He was watching when you had no more strength to look up. Every sigh you released in solitude was heard in the throne room of heaven. Every tear you buried in your pillow was captured in a bottle only He holds. And while they laughed, mocked, and moved on without conscience, God paused the universe to kneel beside your brokenness. When you couldn't carry prayers on your tongue, He read them in your silence. When your spirit was too weary to speak, He translated your agony into divine language. You didn't need to beg Him to understand. You only needed to breathe, and He heard. Because your silence wasn't empty. It was a sanctuary where God and your soul met in sacred sorrow. There is something deeply holy about the way God attends to the hurting. He doesn't rush. He doesn't demand clarity. He doesn't rebuke the broken. He simply stays. And in staying, He sanctifies the pain. He transforms the weeping into worship. Not because the pain is good, but because He is good enough to redeem even the pain. You didn't know it at the time, but every time you cried alone, angels stood guard. Every time your heart broke a little more, He was planting seeds of healing that would grow in the soil of your endurance. They thought they left you shattered beyond repair, but what they didn't realize is that you were never in their hands. You were always in His. And He, unlike them, never turned away when it got too dark, too hard, too painful. No, He stayed through it all. He never flinched at your wounds, never tired of your tears, never judged your silence. He just listened, watched, waited. And that silence, where they thought nothing was happening, was where everything was being rewritten. When a person is falsely accused, mocked, or mistreated, and chooses not to retaliate, something remarkable happens. They invite heaven into their defense. That's what you did. You didn't argue, even though you had every right to. You didn't fight back, even though you could have crushed them with truth. You stayed silent, And in that silence, you handed the case over to a judge who has never lost a battle. You didn't need to scream, "I'm innocent." You didn't need to prove how deeply they lied. You didn't have to tear their mask off or expose their cruelty to the world. That wasn't your role. Your role was to endure with dignity, to walk away from the fire without setting another one in return. And in that very act, you invited God to rise as your defender. You see, people often mistake divine silence for divine absence, but nothing could be further from the truth. God's silence is not neglect, it's preparation. It's the drawing back of a bow before the arrow is released. When you were being torn apart by their words, God was preparing His own. When you were being misrepresented, God was preparing to represent you in a way no human ever could. Because He doesn't just comfort those who are crushed, He vindicates them. He is the only one who sees every motive, every secret intention, every hidden cruelty. He saw the manipulation behind their smile. He saw the venom behind their kindness. He saw the subtle sabotage they performed while calling it love. And He took note, not with rage, but with righteousness. Because when God defends, He doesn't merely punish, He reveals. He exposes. He turns tables in such a way that the truth becomes undeniable, not because you shouted it, but because He revealed it. Truth. And here's the truth. Their cruelty was loud, but it lacked foundation. Your silence was quiet, but it was rooted in truth. And truth always outlives noise. Your defender knows that. That's why he didn't rush. That's why he let the story unfold. He wanted the world to see not only that you were innocent, but that you were refined, that you were kept, that you were protected, not by your own strength, but by divine covering. So while they performed their drama, He was building your redemption. While they spread rumors, He was planting resurrection. While they used words to destroy, He was writing a new story where every tear you cried would serve a purpose. And when the time is right, you won't need to say a word, because God will make sure that your silence thunders louder than their cruelty ever did. There's a great irony in the way life unfolds under God's watch. Those who once laughed the loudest are often the ones who fall the hardest into silence. Not because you cursed them, not because you fought them, but because God, in His divine justice, allowed time to reveal truth. The same mouths that spoke so confidently against you, mocking your stillness, twisting your character and smearing your name, will be the very ones silenced by the weight of your vindication. You didn't chase revenge. You didn't demand an audience. You didn't plead your innocence in desperation. You walked away, trusting that the God who forms galaxies from breath could handle your name better than you could. That's not weakness, that's worship. That's the kind of faith that brings heaven close. And now, the very voices that tried to bury your dignity are watching the seeds of your silence bloom into a harvest they cannot deny. What they said about you will one day shame them, not because you stood up and argued, but because your life will testify louder than their lies. God has a way of lifting the lowly without ever asking permission from the proud. He will honor you not to elevate your ego, but to prove His faithfulness. Because when you choose integrity in the face of insult, when you walk in grace through slander, you reflect Him, and God never leaves His reflection unprotected. Let them speak, let them mock, let them doubt. God is not threatened by their noise, and neither should you be. Every insult they threw became a stone God collected. Every accusation became a page in the testimony He is writing through you. Their volume may have been loud, but it was never lasting. Words spoken in arrogance are never eternal. But honor given by God, that can't be erased. It can't be mocked. So this stands even when the world tries to ignore it. And when that moment comes, when God shifts the narrative and your name is spoken with respect in places where it once was defamed, there will be no trumpet, no announcement, just quiet awe, a holy hush, a stillness that falls over those who once laughed, because they will recognize something they cannot deny. God was with you. God defended you. God honored you because you chose him over your own defense. And that silence will say more than their shouts ever did. There is something about pain endured silently that carries a sacred weight. Not the kind of silence born from fear, but the kind born from faith. You didn't scream, you didn't retaliate, and you didn't collapse for the world to see. You endured, quietly, steadily, and that endurance did something profound. It began to write a story. Not one written with ink or shouted from platforms, but one carved into your spirit, into your walk, into your eyes. Your scars became scriptures, not of weakness, but of divine strength. Each wound you carried silently became a page in the book God is writing through you. A book not of tragedy, but of transformation, because in your silence your soul was speaking volumes. It said, I trust God more than I trust my emotions. It said, I choose dignity over drama. It said, let my life, not my lips, declare my truth. And oh, how loud that message is in the spiritual realm, because anyone can react, anyone can shout, but few can suffer in silence, trusting that their Father sees all, knows all, and will restore all. That kind of trust isn't taught. It's birthed in pain. It's forged in fire. It's the kind of trust that can't be faked, because only those who have been broken can understand the courage it takes to keep walking with grace. They saw weakness. God saw worship. And while they were counting your losses, God was counting your lessons. He was using the very moments of your breakdown to build a foundation of strength no man could shake. You didn't see it then, how could you? The nights were too dark, the tears too many, the betrayal too sharp. But now, look closely. The parts of you that were once bleeding are now healing. The cracks they caused didn't destroy you, they became entry points for divine light. Your scars speak now, not in bitterness, but in wisdom. They tell the story of a soul that was torn but not destroyed, a soul that chose patience over rage, forgiveness over revenge, faith over despair. And that testimony, silent though it may be, is shaking the heavens. Others may never know the full story. They may never understand what it took to stay silent, to keep serving, to keep loving, when all you wanted was to disappear. But God knows, and He is turning every hidden sacrifice into visible strength, every quiet heartbreak into an undeniable legacy, every scar into a signature of grace. You didn't need a platform to tell your story. God is writing it with your life. When they hurt you, they made sure people saw it. Whether through slander, distance, betrayal, or public disregard, they stripped you bare where others could witness it. And you, who deserved kindness, who offered loyalty, were left exposed. But God does not let such exposure go unanswered. He does not allow public shame to linger on those whose hearts were pure. He is a God of reversals. He will not only heal you in secret, but He will also make that healing visible. He will lift you, not so you can gloat, but so the truth can no longer be denied. Your restoration will not be hidden. Your peace will not be private. The same way they watched you break, they will witness you bloom. The same crowd that saw you fall will see you rise, not in pride, but in quiet strength that only comes from divine hands. God's justice is poetic. It doesn't erase the past. it redeems it. And when he restores you, it won't just be personal, it will be public, so that those who once questioned your worth will now be left in holy silence, not because of your revenge, but because of your resilience. You endured quietly while they hurt you loudly, but heaven was never quiet. God was writing, collecting, and preparing, and now, as the noise fades and their words grow still, the voice of God begins to thunder, not in wrath, but in restoration. Be still, you are not forgotten. You are about to be honored for every silent battle you fought, and God Himself will be the one to lift you.